She wasn't supposed to be the bride. But when her cousin ran away just hours before the wedding, Emily, a simple waitress from Ohio, was forced to take her place. One mistake. Vow. And suddenly, she's married to Ethan Blackwell, a cold, mysterious billionaire everyone fears. But what began as an accident soon turned into the most unexpected love story, one that would heal two broken souls forever. Emily Carter whispered those trembling words as the church bells of St. Augustine Cathedral echoed across the bright Los Angeles morning. The scent of roses hung heavy in the air. Guests filled the aisles, their designer perfumes mixing with the soft hum of the choir. Cameras flashed. Laughter rippled through the crowd. To everyone watching, it was the perfect fairy tale wedding. But for Emily, it was chaos disguised in lace. A quiet, hard-working waitress from a small Ohio town, Emily had flown to Los Angeles just 3 days earlier to attend her cousin Lily's extravagant wedding, an event that had been the talk of the city's elite. Lily came from money, glamour, and ambition. Emily came from simplicity. 2 jobs, late nights, and an aging mother she supported back home. No one expected their worlds to collide so disastrously. Just hours before the ceremony, Lily had vanished. No note, no call. Only her abandoned bridal gown and a message left on her phone. "I can't do this. I'm sorry." Panic struck. Lily's mother, hysterical and terrified of humiliation, turned to Emily with tear-filled eyes. "Please," she begged. "Just stand in until we can find her. The groom's family can't know. They barely met Lily anyway. It's a business arrangement, not love." Emily froze. The words made no sense. "Me? You want me to marry him?" "It's just until we explain," her aunt insisted. "Just wear the dress, keep the veil on. No one will notice. You'll save our family's reputation." And that's how it happened. The quiet Ohio girl became a bride she never meant to be. Now, as she stood before the grand altar, her hands trembled beneath the bouquet. Her reflection in the marble floor showed a woman she didn't recognize. Satin gown clinging to her frame, her face hidden beneath a delicate lace veil. The weight of the diamond tiara pressed down like the burden of a lie. Then the music changed. The doors opened, and he walked in. Ethan Blackwell, the man she was accidentally marrying. Everyone in America knew his name. The mysterious billionaire. The tech prodigy who had turned tragedy into an empire. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit, Ethan had an aura that silenced the room. His icy blue eyes carried both power and pain, the kind that made people whisper, "He's untouchable." When his gaze met Emily's through the veil, she felt her heartbeat stumble. He didn't know it wasn't Lily beneath that veil. He didn't know the bride standing before him was a stranger, a woman who could barely afford the rent of her 1-bedroom apartment. He walked down the aisle with calm certainty, unaware that fate had already twisted their lives together in the cruelest way. The priest's voice echoed through the hall. "Do you, Ethan Blackwell, take this woman?" Emily's breath caught. She wanted to scream the truth, to tell him she wasn't the woman he was supposed to marry. But her aunt's pleading eyes met hers from the front pew. Cameras pointed in every direction. The room was a sea of expectations. And before Emily could even form a word, she heard Ethan's low, confident voice. "I do." The guests sighed in admiration. The priest turned to her. "And do you, Emily?" She hesitated. The world spun. Her heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear her own voice. "I do," she whispered, barely audible. Then, the moment that sealed it all, Ethan lifted the veil. The world fell away. Emily's breath caught in her throat. His eyes, so piercingly blue, locked onto hers with a quiet intensity that made her feel exposed, seen, and yet, strangely safe. "You look breathtaking," he murmured. His voice so soft it almost didn't sound real. For a heartbeat, time stopped. The crowd disappeared. It was just her and him. 2 souls connected by a mistake too big to undo. Cameras flashed. Applause erupted. The priest pronounced them husband and wife. The ring slid onto her trembling finger. Cold metal. A lifetime promise built on a lie. Emily tried to breathe, but her chest felt heavy. How had she gone from serving coffee in Ohio to standing beside one of America's most powerful men, now her husband? When Ethan leaned in to kiss her cheek, her heart thundered. His scent, cedarwood and rain, filled her senses. He smiled slightly for the cameras, but behind that smile, there was something unreadable. Darkness, distance. The reception was a blur of champagne and congratulations. Everyone adored the couple, calling them perfect, radiant, destined. Only Emily knew the truth. Her palms were cold, her mind racing. What would happen when he found out? She caught glimpses of Ethan from across the room. Gracious, polite, but emotionally guarded. Every smile was measured, every move calculated. He wasn't a man easily fooled. When the night ended, he approached her quietly. "You seem nervous," he said with a faint smile. "Don't worry. The worst part, the public show, is over now." If only he knew. Emily forced a nod, her throat dry. Right, over. But it wasn't over. It was only beginning. Because as she stepped into the waiting limousine beside her new husband, the weight of what had happened crushed her completely. She had just married a billionaire by accident, a man who could destroy her world with a single word. Outside, fireworks lit up the sky. Inside, silence fell between them. A silence thick with secrets, fear, and the faint spark of something she didn't dare name. And in that moment, Emily Carter realized something that made her heart tremble. Fairy tales don't always begin with magic. Sometimes, they begin with a mistake. Ethan Blackwell was the man everyone whispered about, the kind of name that didn't need an introduction. He was the ghost billionaire of Silicon Valley, the invisible force behind half the world's technology, yet rarely seen in public. Photographers had spent years trying to capture him, but he avoided the spotlight like a man hiding from his own shadow. People said he was cold, ruthless, a heart of steel wrapped in a suit worth more than a mansion. But there was another rumor, one that made even the boldest journalists pause before speaking it aloud. They said Ethan Blackwell couldn't love. That once, years ago, he had lost the only woman he'd ever cared about in a tragic accident. And after that, he had buried not just her, but his heart as well. So when word spread that he'd accidentally married a nobody, a small-town waitress named Emily Carter, everyone expected chaos. Headlines exploded across news feeds. Billionaire's bride mix-up shocks Los Angeles. Who is Emily Carter, the unknown woman who married Ethan Blackwell? Investors panicked. Friends called. His board of directors demanded explanations. But Ethan, calm as ever, didn't flinch. When the truth finally reached him, that the woman in his wedding photos wasn't Lily Montgomery, his intended bride, but her cousin Emily, the world held its breath. Everyone expected him to rage. To annul the marriage within minutes. To destroy Emily's life with a single phone call. But he didn't. Instead, Ethan looked at her, really looked at her, and said quietly, "Then let's not rush to undo this. Maybe it's a sign." Emily blinked, unable to process what she was hearing. A sign. Of what? That the world made a joke out of us. He chuckled softly, a sound that held more pain than humor. Maybe a sign that mistakes aren't always disasters. His tone was gentle, but his eyes, those piercing, unreadable blue eyes, told a different story. There was depth there, darkness, a kind of loneliness that made her chest ache. Emily had no idea what to say. She wasn't supposed to stay married to him. She had expected lawyers, contracts, and scandal. Instead, she found herself facing a man who seemed more curious than angry, more lost than furious. Within a week, Ethan insisted she move into his home, a penthouse that overlooked the endless blue of Malibu's ocean. It was nothing like her world. The building stood like a glass tower above the cliffs, surrounded by silence and sea breeze. Inside, everything gleamed: marble floors, modern art, soft jazz echoing from invisible speakers. Emily felt like she was walking through a dream that didn't belong to her. Every morning, maids greeted her with polite smiles. The housekeeper offered breakfast she couldn't pronounce. And Ethan. He was distant but strangely kind. Never intrusive, never cruel. He gave her space, yet his presence lingered everywhere. She'd catch glimpses of him working in his study, sleeves rolled up, his expression unreadable. He'd occasionally ask if she needed anything, not as a husband, but as someone quietly observing her from a distance. At night, when the mansion fell silent, Emily would lie awake in her oversized bed, wondering why. Why had he asked her to stay? Why hadn't he ended it? Why did he look so broken, even when surrounded by luxury? One evening, unable to sleep, she stepped out onto the balcony. The moon painted the waves silver as they crashed below. And there he was, Ethan, leaning against the railing, staring into the dark horizon. He didn't turn when she joined him. The sound of the sea filled the quiet between them. "Can't sleep?" he asked softly. "I could ask you the same," she replied. "You're always out here." He smiled faintly, eyes still on the ocean. "It's peaceful. Reminds me that the world keeps moving. Even when you wish it would stop." Emily tilted her head. "What are you searching for out there?" He was silent for a moment. Then he whispered, "Something I lost. Maybe peace." His voice cracked ever so slightly, the kind of break that comes from carrying too much grief for too long. Emily wanted to ask what he'd lost, but she could tell the wound was deep and fresh, even if years had passed. So instead, she stood beside him in silence. The cold wind brushed her hair across her face, and for a second, he reached out, instinctively, and tucked a loose strand behind her ear. The touch was fleeting, hesitant, but it sent a warmth spiraling through her chest. In that quiet moment, the distance between billionaire and waitress seemed to fade. There were no titles, no lies, no contracts. Just two people, broken in different ways, standing under the same sky. After that night, something shifted. Ethan began inviting her to breakfast. They'd sit across from each other, sharing coffee and conversation. He listened when she spoke, really listened. Something no one had done for her before. She discovered he loved classical music, and he discovered she had a laugh that made even his cold penthouse feel alive. He showed her his art collection, every painting a window into a soul that missed beauty but didn't know how to reach it anymore. And she told him about her small-town life, about her mother's garden and the diner where she worked. Each word they shared chipped away at the walls between them. Still, the questions lingered in Emily's heart. What secret was he hiding behind those sad eyes? And what would happen the day the world realized their marriage was never meant to be? But for now, for these fleeting days of peace by the ocean, Emily chose to stop asking why. Because somewhere between the lies, the headlines, and the waves, she could feel it, that fragile, dangerous thing called hope, starting to bloom. Emily soon realized that Ethan's wealth, no matter how vast, couldn't hide the shadows in his eyes. His life was wrapped in luxury, shimmering penthouses, private jets, and an empire that stretched across the globe, but his soul carried a quiet, unbearable sorrow. The first time she saw it, he was sitting alone in his study, staring at a faded photograph on his desk. He didn't notice her standing in the doorway, watching as his fingers brushed over the glass. The look in his eyes was something she'd never forget, not anger, not pride, but heartbreak carved too deep to heal. Later, the housekeeper told her what everyone else already knew but never dared to mention. Ethan Blackwell had once been engaged. Her name was Ava Sinclair, a brilliant artist full of light who had painted color into Ethan's monochrome world. They'd been inseparable partners not just in love but in vision. Until one rainy night 3 years ago, a car crash stole her away. Since that day, Ethan had shut every door to his heart, and locked the key inside. Work became his escape, power his shield. People called him cold because they didn't know that behind every calculated smile was a man who'd once begged the universe for a second chance, and never got it. At first, Emily tried to stay out of his way. Their arrangement was still strange to her. She was a wife in name only, living in a house filled with silence and ghosts. But something about Ethan's loneliness tugged at her heart. So she started small. Every morning she'd leave a cup of coffee on his desk, not black like he used to take it, but with a tiny heart drawn in the foam. Sometimes she'd place a vase of wildflowers from the garden in the living room, their scent breaking the sterile perfection of his mansion. Other days she'd slip little notes near his laptop. Don't forget to breathe. You survived yesterday. You'll survive today. Ava would want you to smile again. She never signed them, but he always knew they were from her. And slowly, so slowly, the walls around Ethan's heart began to crack. He started joining her for breakfast. At first, they spoke little polite words about the weather, the news, the stock market. But over time, the silence turned softer, more comfortable. He'd ask about her day, her family, her life before Los Angeles. One afternoon, she told him about her mother's tiny garden back in Ohio, how it was the only thing that made their old house feel alive. Ethan listened quietly, his eyes on her hands as she spoke. When she laughed about accidentally planting carrots upside down as a child, he actually smiled, a real, unguarded smile that made her chest ache in a way she couldn't explain. Still, there were nights when she heard him pacing in his study long after midnight, the sound of broken breaths behind closed doors. He never cried where anyone could see him, but sometimes when lightning flashed across the ocean, she could see the glimmer of tears on his reflection in the window. Then came the storm. It was one of those wild Malibu nights when the sky cracked open and the sea roared in fury. Rain battered against the glass walls, and the entire mansion plunged into darkness as the power went out. Emily found Ethan in the living room, sitting in silence with a glass of whiskey, the storm's flashes illuminating his face in bursts of pale light. She lit a few candles and placed them on the table between them. The flickering glow softened the edges of the cold, empty space. "You don't like storms?" she asked gently. He didn't answer at first. Then he said, "Ava died during one." Her breath caught. "I'm sorry." He shook his head. "Don't be. I just can't seem to stop reliving it. Every thunderclap feels like the crash all over again." Emily sat beside him, close enough to feel his pain radiating like heat. "You can pretend you're not hurting," she whispered, "but pain doesn't disappear by being ignored. It just hides until it breaks you." For a long moment he said nothing. His jaw tightened, his eyes glistening in the candlelight. Then he looked at her, really looked at her. This woman who wasn't supposed to be his wife. This stranger who had walked into his life by accident and somehow understood the language of his silence. A single tear rolled down her cheek. For him, not for herself. Ethan reached out, almost hesitantly, and brushed it away with his thumb. His touch was tender, trembling, as if he were afraid she might vanish too. And for the first time since Ava's death, Ethan's voice broke. "You remind me that I'm still human." The words hung in the air like a confession. Emily's eyes softened. "You are human, Ethan. Just lost. And sometimes being lost is how we find what we truly need." That night didn't lead to passion. No kisses, no promises. Instead, it led to something purer. Two broken souls sitting side by side, listening to the storm outside and the quiet healing within. They didn't need to speak. The silence said enough. Ethan poured out his heart that night. Not in words, but in the way his shoulders finally relaxed, the way his eyes softened when they met hers, the way he allowed himself to breathe without guilt. When the rain finally stopped, he looked out the window and whispered, "Maybe storms don't always destroy. Maybe they wash the pain away." Emily smiled faintly. "Or maybe they show us who's willing to stay through them." From that night on, something changed. Ethan began to live again, just a little. He'd walk barefoot on the balcony in the mornings, coffee in hand, sometimes with Emily beside him. He started painting again, unfinished sketches Ava had left behind, completed now with Emily's help. He didn't say the word love, not yet. But when he looked at Emily, it was clear that something sacred, something fragile, had begun to grow between them, not born from desire, but from understanding. Because sometimes love doesn't start with fireworks. Sometimes it begins quietly, in the middle of a storm between two hearts brave enough to stay. Just when peace had finally started to bloom between them, when laughter had begun to replace silence and comfort had started to heal pain, the past came crashing back. Lily returned. And she came with chaos. It was a bright Los Angeles morning when Emily saw the news. The television blared headlines that made her knees go weak. Runaway bride returns with explosive story. Ethan Blackwell's marriage exposed. A fake bride at the altar. There she was, Lily Montgomery, sitting in a TV studio, her perfectly curled hair gleaming under the lights, her voice sweet yet venomous. She was never supposed to marry him, Lily said dramatically. It was my wedding. Emily stole my life, my groom, my future. The host gasped on cue. The audience murmured. Cameras zoomed in on Lily's tear-streaked face. Emily stood frozen in front of the TV. Her heart pounding so hard she could barely breathe. Within hours, the media storm exploded. Paparazzi swarmed their mansion in Malibu, flashing cameras through the gates, shouting insults and questions. Emily, did you trick Ethan into marrying you? Are you a gold digger? Do you regret lying to America's most eligible billionaire? Tabloids had a field day. Every newspaper, every website twisted the story until Emily became the villain, the small-town girl who schemed her way into a billionaire's life. She barely left her room for days. Every time she looked at her phone, new articles called her names she'd never imagined hearing about herself. Manipulator. Con artist. The fake Cinderella. And yet Ethan said nothing. He was calm, too calm, working behind the scenes, silent as ever. His business partners, board members, and shareholders demanded answers. They wanted the scandal erased. The easiest way was obvious. Annul the marriage, walk away from Emily, and rebuild his spotless image. One evening, Emily found him in his office, staring at a stack of documents. Divorce papers. Her throat tightened. So this is how it ends. He looked up, surprise flickering across his face. Who said that? She tried to stay strong, but her voice broke. Ethan, look at what's happening. Your reputation, your company, everything you worked for is being destroyed because of me. You should end this. I'll go quietly. She placed her wedding ring on the desk and turned to leave. But before she could take a step, Ethan stood. His hand caught hers firmly, pulling her back around. His eyes, those intense, ocean blue eyes, burned with something she hadn't seen before. Don't you dare think I'd let you walk away, he said. His voice low but filled with power. You didn't ruin anything, Emily. You saved me. She blinked, tears brimming. Ethan, the world thinks I'm a liar. Then let them. He straightened, the calmness replaced by conviction. Because I know the truth. The next day, the world saw something it never expected. Ethan Blackwell, the man who never spoke to the media, called a press conference. Dozens of reporters gathered in front of his glass mansion, cameras flashing wildly. When Ethan stepped up to the podium, dressed in a simple suit, the crowd hushed instantly. Emily stood behind him, trembling, her heart in her throat. He looked straight into the cameras and said, Emily Carter is not a mistake. The crowd murmured. He continued louder this time. She is the best thing that ever happened to me. What began as chaos became the most honest thing I've ever known. Cameras clicked furiously. Reporters shouted questions, but Ethan didn't waver. I don't care what you print, what you twist, or what you sell. I married her because life gave me a second chance, and I won't waste it. Emily's tears fell freely as he turned and took her hand in front of the entire world. The moment his fingers laced with hers, the crowd went silent. That clip went viral overnight. Within hours, millions had watched it. Hashtags flooded the internet. Hashtag love beyond mistakes. Hashtag Ethan and Emily. Hashtag real fairy tale. But Lily wasn't finished. Driven by jealousy and rage, she filed a lawsuit, accusing Emily of identity deception and fraudulent marriage. The media went wild again. Legal analysts debated on live TV whether the marriage was valid. The court hearings stretched for weeks. Lily arrived every day in designer dresses, playing the victim, while Emily sat quietly beside Ethan, trying to stay composed. But when Ethan's lawyer presented proof, security footage, messages, and testimonies, it became clear that Emily hadn't planned any of it, that she'd been a victim of circumstances and family pressure. And then came the twist. It was revealed that Ethan had known the truth, that Emily wasn't Lily, within hours of the wedding. And still he chose not to end it. The courtroom fell silent as Ethan took the stand. He looked at the judge and said calmly, "I knew she wasn't Lily. But I also knew she was the only person who made me feel alive again. Chose her. Every day since that moment, I have chosen her." The judge, an elderly woman with kind eyes, smiled faintly before delivering her verdict. This was not fraud. This was fate. A marriage of destiny. The gavel struck. Case dismissed. When they walked out of the courthouse, reporters swarmed again, but this time the questions were softer, curious, even admiring. "Mr. Blackwell, is it true you believe your marriage was fate?" Ethan squeezed Emily's hand and smiled. "No," he said. "I know it is." That night the mansion was quiet again. No reporters, no flashing lights. Just the sound of waves brushing against the cliffs. Emily stood on the balcony, the cool wind tugging at her hair. "You didn't have to fight for me like that," she whispered. Ethan stepped behind her, wrapping his arms around her shoulders. "I didn't fight for you," he said softly. "I fought for us." She turned to him, her eyes glistening. "Do you think we deserve this happiness after everything?" He smiled, brushing a tear from her cheek. "We didn't find happiness, Emily. We built it, out of chaos." And for the first time since that accidental wedding day, Emily realized the truth. What had started as a mistake had become the most real thing she'd ever known. It wasn't an accident anymore. It was love, pure, raw, and written by destiny. Months had passed since the courtroom battle that had nearly torn their lives apart. The chaos had faded into whispers, and those whispers had softened into silence. For the first time in a long time, peace felt real. The Malibu mansion, once a fortress of isolation and pain, had changed too. Where cold marble and glass once stood untouched, laughter now echoed through its halls. The scent of freshly baked bread mixed with the salt of the sea breeze. The place finally felt alive, not like a palace but a home. That evening, Emily stood barefoot in the garden behind the mansion, her toes buried in the warm soil. The hem of her white dress fluttered in the gentle wind as she pressed a young rose plant into the earth. Her hands were dirty, her cheeks flushed from the sun, but she smiled. It was hard to believe that only months ago, she'd been the girl tabloids called a fraud, a mistake. Now she stood as the founder of the Ava Grace Foundation, a charity she had started with Ethan to help widows and orphan children. The name had been Ethan's idea, a tribute to the fiancé he'd lost and the grace he'd found afterward. When Emily had hesitated, not wanting to reopen his pain, he'd only smiled and said, "Ava gave me love once. You taught me how to live it." The foundation had already begun changing lives. Every week, Emily visited local shelters, bringing food, books, and hope to children who had lost everything. Ethan often accompanied her quietly, never announcing who he was, just another pair of hands willing to help. They had found healing not through wealth or grand gestures, but through giving, through building something that mattered. As Emily placed the last rose in the soil, she felt warm arms wrap gently around her waist. She leaned back instinctively, feeling Ethan's steady heartbeat against her back. "Do you know why I never took off my wedding ring?" he whispered, his breath brushing against her ear. She chuckled softly. "Because it reminds you of how strange fate can be." He smiled, pressing his chin lightly on her shoulder. "Because it reminds me that sometimes, mistakes are miracles in disguise." Emily turned in his arms, looking up at him. The sunlight caught in his eyes. Those stormy blues that had once been filled with grief now glimmered with peace. "You still think this was a mistake?" she teased gently. Ethan shook his head. "Not anymore. Maybe the universe just needed to take the long way to bring you to me. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They just stood there, surrounded by the scent of roses and the golden glow of the setting sun. The same ocean that once looked lonely now shimmered with light, its waves reflecting the colors of their quiet redemption. Emily placed her hand over his heart. "You know," she said softly, "when I first came here I thought this house was beautiful, but it felt like a crystal cage. I felt trapped, like I didn't belong in your world." "And now?" he asked. "Now," she smiled, "it feels like home." Ethan brushed a stray lock of hair from her face. "That's because you made it one." They walked together toward the balcony overlooking the ocean. The sky had turned into a masterpiece, streaks of pink, orange, and violet dancing over the waves. It was as if the world itself was celebrating their peace. In the distance, they could hear the laughter of children, the sound carried from the small playground they'd built near the Foundation's shelter down the coast. Ethan had personally overseen its construction, saying every child deserved a place to run freely, the way he never could after Ava's death. Emily's eyes softened at the sound. "You gave them something you never had, a chance to heal." He looked at her. "No," he said quietly. "We did." They stood in silence for a while, watching the horizon swallow the sun. Emily thought of the journey that had brought them here. The confusion, the accusations, the heartbreak. Every step had felt unbearable then, but now, looking back, it all seemed like a series of small miracles leading to this moment. Her thoughts drifted to Lily. They hadn't spoken since the trial, but Emily no longer held bitterness in her heart. She had even written to her cousin once, not to accuse or question, but to forgive. Maybe someday Lily would find her own peace too. As twilight deepened, the first stars began to shimmer in the indigo sky. Ethan slipped off his jacket and draped it around her shoulders. She looked up at him, smiling faintly. "You know," she said, "people still call me the accidental bride." He raised a brow. "And what do you call yourself?" She thought for a moment, then said softly, "The grateful one." He chuckled, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I'll take that." They watched the waves together. Two souls who had once been strangers, bound by a twist of fate, now bound by choice, by love, by everything they had survived. The camera would have caught the image perfectly. A man and a woman framed by the golden light of dusk, standing in a garden blooming with roses, their hands intertwined. And then, as the world faded into twilight, Emily's voice would narrate softly, her words floating like a whisper across the ocean breeze. Fairy tales don't always start with magic. Sometimes they begin with a mistake that teaches us how to love, how to heal, and how to believe in miracles again. The screen would slowly fade to black, leaving only the sound of the ocean, steady, eternal, like the rhythm of their hearts. Because sometimes, love doesn't arrive perfectly wrapped or planned. Sometimes it begins with chaos, survives through storms, and ends with peace, in the arms of the one who was never meant to be yours, but somehow always was. And as the last light of day melted into the sea, Ethan whispered the words that would linger forever in her memory. "Here's to the most beautiful accident of my life." Emily smiled, her heart full. "Here's to the miracle," she replied. "That came disguised as a mistake." And that was the story of how one mistake turned into a miracle. If this tale touched your heart, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. Share it with someone who still believes in destiny. And subscribe for more emotional love stories that will make you believe in magic again.